Good afternoon again. I'm Francis Levy. Ed Neresessian and I are co-directors of the Philoctetes Center, and I hope you enjoyed the film. For those of you who are just coming now, I just want to make three short announcements, and that is that on the 11th November, we're having Mark Doty, David Lehman, and Mike Braziller talking about Frank O'Hara. On November 14th, Stephanie Chase, who does our classical music series and who's the director of the Music of the Sphere Society, will be doing From Muse to Music, exploring the craft of the American art song. Then on December 5th, we have a panel on the graphic novel with Linda Barry, Hilary Shute, Christopher Couch, Ben Chakor, and Francoise Mouly. And on the 12th, finally, our improvisational jazz series, Living in the Musical Moment, continues with Louis Porter and Mark Rossi. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brigitte Peucker. Am I doing better?
Yes.
I've worked so long on that, so many years. Brigitte Peucker is the Leavenworth Professor of German and Professor of Film Studies at Yale University, where she also serves as Director of Graduate Studies in Film. She has written extensively on problems of representation in literature and film in such books as Lyric Descent in the German Romantic Tradition, Incorporating Images, Film, and the Rival Arts, and The Material Image, Art and the Real in Film. She is currently editing Blackwell's companion to Rainier Warner Fassbinder and finishing Aesthetic Spaces, the Place of Art in Film. All of her books on film include material on Hitchcock. She has also contributed to the Hitchcock Centenary Essays and to the forthcoming Blackwell's Companion to Hitchcock, and did a wonderful previous panel here on In the Year of the 13 Moons. And without further ado, I want to present Brigitte, who will moderate this afternoon's panel and introduce our other distinguished guests.
Thank you very much, Francis. It's really a pleasure to be here again. Always such an involved, engaged audience, which is wonderful. And it's my pleasure as well to introduce our group. I'll begin with Richard Allen, who's seated to my right. He is the chair of cinema studies and a professor, obviously, of cinema studies at NYU. He has done a great deal of work on Hitchcock. He has his book, Hitchcock's, is it Irony? Romantic Irony is just one of the texts he's written on Hitchcock. He has edited 3 collections of Hitchcock essays. He is the editor of the Hitchcock Annual, the journal for Hitchcock studies. And he works in 2 other areas of film as well. He began actually by writing about philosophy and psychoanalysis in film, and is currently engaged in another project on Hindi film, or
Bollywood.
Bollywood. Is that what it comes to? All right.
Everybody calls it Bollywood.
Bollywood film, and so these 3 areas, and actually his current work is in that latter area. And to his right is Joe McElhaney, who is an associate professor at Hunter in film studies and teaches at CUNY in the theater department, the PhD program of the theater department. He's written books on Hitchcock, on Albert Maysles, and also on, more recently, I have to check, I'm sorry, on Vincent Minnelli. He is currently editing the Blackwell's Companion to Fritz Lang. And his writings on Hitchcock have appeared in the Centenary Essays as well, and there's also one forthcoming in the Companion to Hitchcock. John Belton is seated to his right, and he is a professor of English and film studies at Rutgers. He's the author of 5 books. One of them called Widescreen Cinema, won an award, the Krasna-Krauss Award, in 1993. And he's also prepared a textbook called American Cinema, American Culture that goes along with a PBS series on American cinema. He has edited a volume on Hitchcock's Rear Window, and he is an associate editor of film history and he is the editor of a series on film and culture for Columbia Press. All three of these people have many other attributes, very, very eminent, all three of them, but I will stop there. And now I don't need really to introduce Ed Neresessian, but as you know, he's a professor of psychiatry at Weill Medical College, part of Cornell, and he's a training and supervising analyst for the New York Psychoanalytic Institute. He has published essays on curiosity, creativity, dreams, and other topics. And of course, as you know, he is both the co-founder and co-director of this Philoctetes Center. So let me just begin by saying a few things about this film in order to generate discussion among you. This was not a film that was particularly well received when it was released. But over the years, it's been people have begun to feel that this is really one of Hitchcock's great masterpieces. So why is it, or how is it that we engage in this film? In one way, at the simple level of narrative, we have a film here about someone who suffers a traumatic experience, develops acrophobia, is seduced by the image of a woman, and through a series of performances by that woman to become a detective and, in a sense, a kind of therapist for her, suffers another traumatic experience when he loses her, and then, as you know, acts as a kind of Pygmalion figure, recreating this fantasy woman who actually never existed, and then thinks he's about to be cured from this the original trauma, and then we're left with him standing there looking down. At the level of cinematic style, it fascinates us, I think, because of, as usual with Hitchcock, the way in which the camera is used. There is the very famous Vertigo shot, the zoom in simultaneous with a tracking back, a kind of contra zoom shot that simulates the experience of vertigo that Scotty has. And there are the other uses of the camera that are both disturbing and yet also sort of bring us into the film. And then possibly at the level of spectatorship, we can read the film as a kind of allegory of looking. The allegory of the spectator, who is Scotty, who desires the image and also analyzes the image to a lesser extent. Maybe I'll drop that and say he desires the image. But we, as spectators of the film, both desire the image and desire to analyze the image. Clearly, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and so now I'd like to turn the discussion over to whoever wishes now to jump in and say something next.
In terms of the visual that you brought up, I think one of the things that's so striking about the film is it's one of the most complex Hitchcock films, simply in terms of the mise-en-scène itself, in terms of the staging. That astonishing sequence early in the film between Scotty and Gavin Elster in Gavin Elster's office, and the incredible tension that's created there between who sits and who stands, who moves in the office and who doesn't, and the way Gavin, the whole power relation in that sequence shifts from the moment that Gavin gets up from his chair and begins to walk around the desk and then walks back to the meeting room and then back again. So he really forms a kind of spell, casts a kind of spell over Scotty, not simply through the narration, but also through the way that he moves. So you've got scene after scene in a film like that, but it's also, I think, a remarkable film for the way in which a kind of painterly or graphic conception of the image is so strong in it. The very expressive matte work over the course of the film, which isn't just functional for Hitchcock, but almost invariably a live-action image is combined with a matte shot in some way or other. It's almost like a live-action image is inadequate for what Hitchcock wants to convey here, and so a matte finishes it for him. And you've got this repeatedly over the course of the film, a very strong tension between, obviously, a live-action image and an image that's painterly or graphic in nature, beginning with the credit sequence on. And then you've even got animation in the film as well, in Scotty's dream, when the bouquet breaks apart and the petals fly at the spectator. It's like something out of Fantasia, really. And so it's almost in a way in which Hitchcock is just grabbing from multiple sources. In a way, I would say it's very typical of him in a way, but also it's so intense in this period because it's what's happening in the cinema in general. The world of painting and the world of animation is infiltrating live action so powerfully.
Well, one could extend that, I think, to talk about camera movement and mise-en-scène as well. Of course, one of the things I think Hitchcock does in terms of transforming the source material is that the source material, the novel, is, I can talk about this a bit more, I've brought it with me, but is very much, in some ways the film is very close to the novel in the sense that the novel explores this obsession. But what Hitchcock, of course, does is he creates, Scotty's obsession for Judy is replicated in the relationship that the spectator has to the image itself. And a wonderful example of this is the scene in Ernie's restaurant, which in the novel is actually at the theatre. And of course they say they're about to go to the opera, and the space of Ernie's restaurant is in a sense turned into a space of theatre. But there's that wonderful camera movement where Jimmy Stewart turns and the camera tracks back slowly and then stops momentarily to frame the entire scene, as if it's with the picture and of flowers and the flowers and the vanishing point in this fantastically beautiful lush red surrealist sort of microcosm. And then the music starts and the camera starts moving towards the object that Scott is looking at. Well, it's not quite a point of view shot, and it's as if Hitchcock's camera is tracing the connection between Scotty's point of view, Scotty's look, and what he's looking at, and suggesting and stopping in that objective space, as if the world of the film, Hitchcock's film, is identifying itself with what it is Scott is seeing, the image of Judy. And of course, it also, amazingly enough, begins a movement that I think John is going to talk about some more, wants to talk about the spiral movement in the film. It actually begins to trace that trajectory. And the camera actually, and in the forward movement, the moment Herman's music starts, the camera actually does a sort of swoon. It swoops down towards her and then stops just short, as if it's begun that spiral trajectory which is going to define the overall movement of the film.
I feel I've been fed a transition here. But maybe slowly get to it. One of the things that Joe was talking about was just this spectacular look of the film, which is VistaVision, extremely sharp, Technicolor, lavish colors. I think all of this falls into a kind of larger reading of the film, in which draws on detective fiction, how that's read, that the criminal is the author, the detective is the reader, that Gavin Elster is essentially the master of mise-en-scène in this film, that he selects where Judy Madeline is taking Scotty. He dresses Madeline to become dresses Judy to become Madeline, just as Hitchcock has selected the costumes that Kim Novak will wear. And I think part of the fascination with the film is the compelling power of the mise-en-scène to sway reason. Scotty is the hard-headed Scot, supposedly, who's lost his reason because of his vertigo, and to draw him into the spiral, to draw him into the mise-en-scène. Gavin Elster uses old San Francisco, in part because of its Spanish theme, which he connects to the Carlotta story, but it also becomes this remarkable stage on which the entire film is set. To talk about Gavin Elster directing our attention is perhaps, or directing the story is maybe a little extreme, but I think it's important to remember all of those scenes of of Scotty following Madeline throughout the city of San Francisco. He is a detective. He's following her. But in fact, she's leading him on. She's staging this elaborate tour of the mise en scène. So if there's still time for me to do my transition to the spiral motif, if I quickly.
You better ask Brigitte.
Yeah, no, well,
There's plenty of time.
but there's plenty of time.
But maybe there are things to be said about
What's
the
been said?
tableau you have mentioned, the setting the scene, setting the stage, and the way in which the Madeline figure, Kim Novak, is presented both as an eroticized woman, as a piece of art, funerary statuary, and as eroticized perhaps in the flower shop scene, then connected with death and art in the cemetery scene. So, what are the effects of this on Scotty, and how are his emotions, in effect, programmed? From the beginning, the woman and the erotic is connected with death. Where to go from here? Well,
Not yet.
and then Ed always jumps in at the end, and then he sums it all up and gives us new insights that change the frame of things. But perhaps to go back to, we might all comment more on what Richard has said about the action of the camera, too, in creating this series of views, and it's interesting that what Richard pointed out as well, that the camera is not from the point of view of Scotty, that there's a distinct separation between the point of view and Scotty, not at all junctures. For instance, it seems that when he is standing in the museum looking at the figure of the woman, tracing the connection between her hairdo and the hairdo on the portrait, the bouquet next to her and the bouquet in the portrait. I think that the points of view of the camera and Scotty are more elided, although I'm not sure they're exactly the same. But at other junctures, it's very different. One moment I noticed in particular this time is when Scotty goes back to the flower shop. You first see the flower shop, you see the camera zoom in on a bouquet in the window. But then it pulls back to reveal Scotty standing at an oblique angle to that window, not his point of view. So that's one of the things about the film that fascinates, that there is another so pronounced point of view. I don't know, Richard, maybe if you want to elaborate on that or revise it.
Well, I was thinking of the way in which, looking at the film again, the striking ways in which Hitchcock composes the shots in a manner that clearly defies the logic of spatial temporal continuity, showing a sort of very self-conscious orchestration of the shots. For example, the scene when they go back to Scotty's apartment, and you have a shot where Scotty is in the doorway with Madeline. And you have a shot, seemingly a simple reverse shot structure. But you see a shot of Scotty, and then the reverse shot, Scotty is looking at himself and Madeline in the doorway, and so it gives there's a reaction shot of Scotty, but the shot that you see from his point of view contains him in the point of view. So it creates this dissonance between it drives a wedge in a simple point of view shot structure, and creates this commentative narration. And there are a number of wonderful shots in the film. Shot compositions in the film that some other people, Marshall Doodlebaum has talked about some of these, where you get you get a mimicking of the positions of the character in the frame. So there's a shot where just before they go to the Mission San Juan Bautista, Madeline goes over to a big. It's in Scotty's apartment. There's a big lamp on the table, and Madeline goes over there and leans across it, and then you see Scotty move forward to speak to her, and in his shot, he's leaning over the lamp in exactly the same frame. I mean, it's an absolutely impossible juxtaposition, but it's obviously sort of a highly commentative form of narration where Hitchcock's showing, by this stage, the total fusion or identification between these two characters as a formal, as a graphic and pictorial orchestration. There's other examples of this in the film. Lots of them.
Yes. Wouldn't you also say that in the shot you described earlier in Ernie's restaurant, where we have the profile shot of Kim Novak looking to the right, and then later, delayed, deferred, not at the same time, they're not mirror images, you have the profile shot of Scotty that is in effect looking at her.
Right. And in fact, that's an impossible shot. It's purporting to connect Scotty's point of view with hers. The suggestion is of a point of view connection, but the relationship between their profiles, it can't be a point of view. Right. So it's at once a sort of point of view shot, but yet, again, commenting on the idea that in fact this image is perhaps a fabrication.
And setting it up as a mirror image in a specular space, in effect. Yeah.
I mean, I think so many of the formal devices of the film, the cutting, the use of point of view, the use of movement, it's based on this relationship on the one hand between this idea of fusion that you've talked about, but also the importance of distance. So that, for example, the camera movement in Ernie's restaurant, the camera movement at the art gallery, those cameras are moving. The camera's moving in that way because Scotty must maintain a certain distance from Madeline, and the distance is part of the fascination, part of the allure. But at the same time, Hitchcock practically has to convey how Scotty's mind is operating at that moment, how he's putting together the spiral in the hair, the spiral in the painting, and in general the obsession. And I would say in a larger sense, a lot of this simply has to do with neurosis itself. There's this idea which some of these formal devices have to do with conveying a kind of sickness on the part of Scotty. So that movement at Ernie's, you cannot have a conventional camera movement where he looks over, cut to point of view, and then track in that simply complements. You've got to have something almost neurotic in the way that the camera moves. So what better way to have him look in one direction? The camera pulls back from the act of looking very quickly and then very slowly moves forward, but never quite reaches Madeline. You keep waiting for a camera to actually go up to Madeline behind her, but it stops. So you're also caught up in this fascination built upon a certain kind of distance from the...
Neurotic or aesthetic?
Both. What's the difference? Well, we're talking about the 50s here, so I would say it's the same thing.
Neurotic presupposes a kind of ideology, and that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
That's and psychology, and I'm wondering you could look at it musically.
How so?
To the extent that this reminds me of when I was thinking Schoenberg. I mean, it's like 12. He's creating. It's a music, a point of view. It's very, very subtle and very, very, and very profound, really aesthetically, because he's having 2 points of view that are actually not coeval, but not meeting, and that's creating the sense of distance that you're talking about. Yeah. But I mean, to put it in a neurosis, you're creating kind of a condition, and I'm not sure if that's what the film is fundamentally about, even though it's called Vertigo. For me,
what do you think?
I wonder if this is a good moment for the spiral.
Not quite, no.
No?
Everybody's talking about the spiral but me. A point of view is quite complicated in the film, especially given Judy's flashback, which shatters a certain kind of regime of perspective we have on the film. But I think the key is the first point of view shot in the film, which is the Vertigo shot. And this characterizes the way we're going to see through Scotty's eyes. It is a disturbed point of view, as you said, described it. It's this antithetical device which the camera movement's doing one thing and the zoom is doing something else. And I think that Elster and Madeline fill in this point of view shot, and that to some extent every other shot, a point of view shot of Scotty's in the film until the very end, is in some way part of the Vertigo strategy, the strategy of hooking him and linking this sick, neurotic point of view into their machinations. And what's diabolic about this is that the solution of the film at the end is to give him no point of view. When he's cured, we don't see anything. It's sort of like the negation of him as a subject. And that the only way in which he exists as a subject for us is as a delusional subject, and that's his vitality, I think. And that's the beauty of the film. So the spiral motif is that Elster and Madeline duplicate the Vertigo in the mise en scène of the film, through her hair, through the posies, through the sequoia with the rings on it, all of which are part of a strategy to manipulate his voyeurism, of course, to make him sicker, but also to present Madeline as somehow the embodiment of that attraction, repulsion that is his own disease. That he identifies with her, but he's also identifying with his own sickness and is pursuing that.
And the spiral, of course, is picked up also in the actual trajectory of the car up and down the streets of San Francisco. So it's
following Madeline.
So it's sort of writ large. And I think the point about your distance is very important, that this forward tracking shot, point of view shot, backward tracking reaction shot, which governs so much of the film. It's at once, Scott is being at once drawn in. He's following, pursuing the detective, but he's actually being drawn in simultaneously by the shot. But it's always there's always a sense of distance maintained. She's disappearing all the time and constantly vanishing.
I don't understand one thing. I said it to Hallie before. Why did he die in the beginning? I'm speaking of spiraling. Why does he live and the cop dies?
It's part of the irrational logic of the film.
Right.
I mean, there's absolutely no way it looks like he could never get down from that position that he's in. But it's some have even argued illogically, perhaps, but it's a logical film in so many ways that, in fact, from that point on, I forget, is it Chris Marker? Someone argued that, in fact,
Robin Wood,
as
if he were suspended.
As if he were suspended, but the entire film could be seen as a kind of hallucination
in the moment
him
of
hanging.
That's what I'm getting at.
It's like that moment in North by Northwest when they really have to die.
Yeah.
But they can't die because of Hollywood logic also.
But the spiral, of course, and there's other aspects of the film fit into the spiral. Of course, the Vertigo shot itself, the zoom-in, track-out shot. In a sense, it's a spiral motif, and it's an implosion of the spiral. If there's been this sense of trajectory through time on a spiral and the distance maintained, at the moment of the loss of Madeline, it's as if Scott's subjectivity completely collapses, and there's a sort of implosion of it. And of course, it's also a sort of disruption of the world of the beautiful illusion of the film is shattered in that moment as well. But the spiral motif is also picked up in the reconstitution in the 360-degree shot, which isn't simply a circle; it's actually a spiral motif. And the camera is sort of spiraling in. Well, actually, they're twisting around on a platform, but effectively the camera appears to be spiraling into them. And of course, then the background emerges and it begins to spiral out, and then it spirals back in. But they're at that moment, they're in this. It's at once constructing the ideal of Madeline and deconstructing it at the same time, because of course the moment Judy becomes Madeline, the illusion is shattered. I mean, it's a radically self-contradictory moment.
But that shot also encapsulates the formal strategies of the film in so many ways, because it's a false 360-degree tracking shot. As you're watching, it creates the effect of camera circling around them. But in fact, that's not what Hitchcock did at all.
Right.
The camera on the set was just tracking in very slightly and back out again. But through a combination of elements, the rear projection, moving platform, and the very slight tracking of Hitchcock's camera on the set, it's a false 360 degrees.
I think it's in Hitchcock's interview with Truffaut that he says concerning that moment that the camera is involved in a kind of ménage à trois with
It's also, I think, a moment when he gets out of the spiral, begins to remove himself from the spiral, just prior to his recognition that Judy is Madeline, because within the 360-degree movement, there's a deja vu moment.
Yeah. Yes.
It takes him back to San Juan Bautista, and there's a look comes into Jimmy Stewart's eye of some kind of vague recognition, and that memory is the prelude to looking at the jewelry in the mirror, which involves a similar kind of very, very complicated camera movement. Just almost like the first time he saw her, going in and coming back out and so forth. And I think that signals coming out of whatever dream state he's been in.
I want to talk a little bit more about this question of pathology, though, because I also think all Hitchcock's work is poised between a sort of idealization and an idealization of romance, and also at the same time nihilism and its subversion. And I don't think that it's sufficient. I don't think one gets to the profundity of this film to simply see it as an examination of pathology. This sometimes has happened in the literature. I mean, there's lots and lots written on this film, as you can imagine. And often it's for example, I mean, very important criticisms of articulated about it's an examination of the pathology of male desire. First you idealize the woman out of this world, and then you punish her for failing to live up to that ideal. And that's as far as that goes, I think clearly that's what's happening in the film. But it's also, I think, a romantic film. And to be a romantic film, I think one has to take seriously the idea of romantic love. And I think here is there's important differences between Hitchcock and his source material, because in the Vertigo, from a novel by Boileau and Neresessian, and it's called D'entre les morts. But it's the English title. The book is written, it's published as Vertigo. But in that book, it's all the elements of the obsession are there. The plot, the aestheticism, the analogy between the figure of the woman and the painting. But what's missing in the novel is the idea of romantic love. I mean, he's an obsessional character. He's not very sympathetic, and she is manipulative and unattractive, and so there's no sense of there being. It's tawdry, in a sense. The relationship is really tawdry. Now, there's a tawdriness or potential tawdriness to the film, I think, too, lurking beneath the surface. But I also think that this is a film that is invested and in the idea of romantic love, the ideal of romantic love. Why? Well, I think partly it's through the use of Jimmy Stewart in the film, and also Ernest Lehman writing in the character of Midge, which gives a sense of reality, even gravitas to the character. And the other aspect is the Judy character. I mean, who clearly by the end of it's of course it's a film you look at twice and see the second time completely differently, and you're looking at her character's response to Jimmy Stewart, and you're thinking all the time, well, in what sense is she being in the role cast by Gavin Elster, or by her and Gavin in collusion, and to what extent is she stepping outside that role? But clearly there's a level at which she is stepping outside that role. It becomes very clear at the end when they embrace before she goes up to the mission. So, and of course, it's her feelings towards Scotty so determine the character of her actions in the second half, and her willingness to submit to the torture that he inflicts upon her. The point is about this. It seems to me that it's not simply a film about pathology, it's a film about romantic love, and therein lies its profundity. Why? Because, in a sense, what you have here is an exploration of the role of idealization itself in romantic love.
Isn't it about the impossibility of romantic love?
Well, Is it? You could say it's well, that's the question.
Or the fact that romantic love is a fantasy.
In the film, I think romantic love is shown to be, in the film, it turns out to be impossible, right? I mean, it collapses. But I think one's hope to the very end, even that moment that the kiss in the final kiss, where they come together it's Hitchcock who destroys it all by the figure of the nun. Right. The Deus Ex Machina, the figure of the nun comes up and bang, it's over. But just before that moment, you're still, I think, wishing hope against hope that this might, they've both been exposed. The point about the romantic love is romantic love involves idealization, as fantasy does. But it's not just idealization of pathology, it's something more, isn't it? I mean, what is it? I mean, you could spend hours talking about it, but it's something to do with reality.
It's only a first time.
Robin Wood, in one of Robin's, I was talking to you about that, I got that idea from Robin Wood, actually. He mentions in one of his essays, he compares it to Winter's Tale, I think, at one point, and it's the notion of bringing back someone you thought was dead to life. I mean, if you talk about romantic love, it's the late Shakespeare, I mean, is I think, a sub-theme here, I mean, in playing around with images of the return, of bringing things back that you thought, because he's in love with something that doesn't exist.
Well, he is, but of course she does exist. She does exist as the flesh and blood Judy.
Right.
She's not simply a figment.
Kim.
She's Judy. And Judy's
Kim.
there. He feels her, he kisses her, he touches her, and he feels her and kisses her and touches her again. So it's not that simply Madeline doesn't simply not exist.
In the French version, which unfortunately I couldn't get the book, so I only have seen little bits of it here and there, he calls her Eurydice.
Yeah.
And it's based on that myth. What you connect to Shakespeare, it really is before, has to do with the way the French has used it.
And that makes perfect sense when you think about the final stage in her transformation as she emerges from the bathroom, bathed in the green light of the neon sign of the Empire Hotel, and she's derealized, but also made ghoulish. I mean, I don't really see that as romantic love in the Hollywood sense. How do we... yes, it could be incorporated into the whole Gothic theme that actually runs through the film, but even the Gothic theme, that's not romantic love, it's something else. And of course people have seen him as a necrophiliac, which may also be may also be valid. So I don't know how you incorporate those scenes in which the sort of ghoulishness of the figure, the woman brought back from the dead, Eurydice.
And also Herman's music there is citing the Liebestod from Tristan and Isolde.
Right.
Very good.
The music is, good part of the film from the way.
Yeah.
Also part of the spiral motif. Herman's ascending and descending. Notes constantly evoke the spiral.
Well, Tristan and Isolde is also about romantic love, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. and death.
But Judy is sort of the way the language of Judy is so wonderful. I mean, when she becomes Judy and she talks Judyese, and it's really the essence of, like, couldn't we say that they are all, that the two characters could be combined together and sort of say we have the idealization that they're created by imagination, and then the reality of the flesh and blood human being, and that's what's always hard in your discussion of romantic love, always hard thing
to bring together,
to integrate in human beings. I mean, to some extent.
Can we speak of a romantic style to a film in which the story itself, if one follows it carefully, is not romantic at all, but it's almost a deconstruction of romantic desire? But we still perhaps sometimes think of Vertigo as a romantic film because it's so incredibly sumptuous and it creates this atmosphere of romance so powerfully that somehow or other we are also perhaps working through the text all the time trying to figure out, is this a deeply romantic film or is it in fact a very ironic film about romance?
Right.
I wonder what you think about, someone was mentioning all the scenes in San Francisco and environs that we recognize. And you were mentioning the reality of the flesh and blood woman or actress. And if we think about the opening credits in which a face, not, by the way, Kim Novak's face, but when the camera moves in so closely to her face that we see her pores, I wonder if there isn't a sense in which it is about sort of the physical substratum of what becomes neurosis and psychosis. I mean, if you think about Saul Bass's credits with the various Vertigo-like shapes that sort of emerge around and on the woman, and the very modernist abstract images. It almost seems to me, even at that point, to be thematizing or pointing to the connection between the body or the real city and sort of fantasies that emerge from and around that. And I think it's such an interesting choice to focus on recognizable settings. They form the backdrop to all of the neurotic scenarios that are set up.
Did that first shot you alluded to before remind you of Persona in any way? The first on the face?
Yes, I mean, in a way, but there, of course, it's more than one image of a face, and there's a sort of oscillation between the two women in that. But that's a wonderful, wonderful beginning. But I just wonder whether someone can comment on the relation of the actual city and the body as it's shown to us in those opening images, the face anyway.
I can't comment on the relationship between the body in the opening and the city, but I could comment on the relationship, the role of the city and the body of Judy Barton. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think there's other aspects of these. I mean, it sort of opens up other aspects of the film, slightly less psychological, or they're related to the psychology, which is questions of class and ethnicity. That this whole investment in romantic level pathology is also a class, has class dimensions, and the contrast between the real Judy and the figure of Madeline is very much a class difference, and the allure of a sort of middle class Scotty. The allure of Madeline is this sort of heightened sort of class. It's a sense of sophistication and so on and so forth. And there's also the buried ethnicity question as well. The old California, which is a sort of Hispanic California, and the sense of so there's this whole sense of the allure or the exoticism of desire for the otherness of old California, which is of course a place where men were highly patriarchal culture, but also the figure of as the film makes clear, but also
class and gender, I would say as well, because Gavin Elster functions as a kind of aristocrat in the film,
yes,
who also is very attached to the 19th century. The phrase power and freedom, men had the power to do that in those days. It's clearly something Gavin is attracted to.
He's a sort of Victorian. Hitchcock's so fond of these sort of, he gets it from Buchan and elsewhere, these sort of dandy, this aristocratic dandy figure who is somehow sort of beyond, has a morality that, amorality, or it doesn't conform to middle-class morality in any way at all. And Gavin Elster's a peculiar sort of, he's a sort of American version of this sort of dandy English aristocrat.
But it's something he learned. He married money when he married his wife. And there's a sense in which Scotty, didn't he and Elster and Midge all go to college together? So that is a way in which they are
Midge
all
has forgotten
of
him,
the
which
same.
is interesting.
Sorry?
Midge has forgotten him, which is interesting, which makes him feel more and more as though Gavin is some sort of creature that Scotty has summoned up in relation to his unconscious needs.
The only aristocracy is either unseen, Madeline Elster, who's killed, or dead. That is the old San Francisco. I think if there's this desire for Madeline as some sort of class status, that again is revealed to be impossible or false. It just doesn't exist.
But San Francisco was embedded in the film. To come back to your point, everything is tied in. It's very typical of the way he works. Always with Hitchcock, it's always choose a setting and then choose the most cliched elements of that setting. So if it's Secret Agent and it's set in Switzerland, then you have a scene in a chocolate factory, for example.
Yes, but never so consistently recognizable as in this case. I just thought that it might be a device to intensify the fantasy of the narrative.
On the most obvious level, San Francisco, of course, is a city constructed on hills, so it's a perfect landscape of Scotty's imagination. But at the same time, it's a strange. If you have a fear of heights, if you have vertigo, why would you remain in San Francisco? Why would you move somewhere else? Okay, so it's a part of the illogic of the film.
Yeah, move to Nevada.
Exactly. But also just that great scene between Scotty and Midge, where everything has to do with San Francisco in some form or other, including the brazier that's built upon the principle of the Cantilever Bridge.
Yes, right. Yeah, and we haven't talked about this. I mean, that makes me think the absurdity. I mean, it's important, I think, part of the film to recognize is the complete absurdity of the plot in terms of the detective plot. I mean, it's utterly ridiculous at every level.
Hitchcock is very much aware of that. He said, how did Gavin Elster know that Scotty would not be able to get up those stairs? I mean, it's an awfully ornate scenario to put into play, built on the presumption that somehow he's not going to be able to get this. What if he does get up those stairs? He's going to see him standing there with his dead wife.
In the French, it's the same thing.
It's taken completely
in a church instead of in a church. So that's not that's he's taking from the.
Yes. Hitchcock takes care of this in that scene between Elster and Scotty, where Elster says, "You think I'm making this up?"
Yes.
I can't make this up. And he's making it up. Entirely made up. So if you ever come back and say it's a shoddy made up story, we've already been through that and passed the test.
Wait a bit. What I would like to say is normally when I go to the movies, I don't think twice about them afterwards. I go see the movie, I enjoy it, and it's over. So here, you asked me to participate in this roundtable, so I had seen this movie 3 times before. I rented it again and looked at it over the last 3 days, little parts at a time. And so I have all sorts of thoughts that are completely connected to the fact that I have to be here and have nothing to do with whatsoever with what my original feelings about the movie were. I also did a little bit of digging around and found out about the origin of the novel, the fact that it was written by 2 people, and one of them wrote certain aspects of it and the other one wrote other aspects, so it was a work of a double. And I also found a little segment of it written in French, which to me reads in a very romantic way, the way he describes in that little segment, they describe his feelings after he has saved her from the San Francisco Bay, and how all those various emotions that he's feeling. It's rather touching, in fact, and makes you think about the idea that when he saves her at that point, he in a way has gotten himself hooked to pursuing this because he has a history that the other person fell. Now he's the savior as opposed to being saved himself. And I will say a few things about that, but I wanted to comment. Everything I'm saying is speculative, out of my head. It's my fantasy. It has nothing to do with the reality of these characters, if they existed. But I think what may be suggested in the fact that he's hanging from these gutters, which are already coming off, and he's very high up and not falling, is a description of the man's state of mind. That he's this kind of elegant, well-dressed, easygoing on the surface guy, especially in the beginning when he's with Madge. But in fact, he's fragile. And this fragility is what leads him throughout the whole movie into where he ends up. I don't think he's psychotic. I think he's perverted. He's perverted because he likes to essentially create a woman the way he wants the woman to be. he tried that, and again I'm speculating, I think he tried that with Madge in college. Madge got scared, didn't want to do it, so he now repeats it. And the reason why I say that is because, and I think Madge is probably a lot more of an intriguing character if one wants to really study her, because she paints that picture with her head. So she essentially tells him, I can also dress up. Yeah. So if your desire is for a woman to dress up and play out some kind of sexual sin, I can do that too. And he gets very scared because he's panicked of women. He can only see the woman on the surface. He cannot see the woman beyond the surface.
But could I just say, it also punctures. It's like behind me a picture of Dorian Gray. It's also a puncturing, having her face.
A fantasy.
Having her face. It's actually a very real face, and her body is it sort of punctures.
But she's
also
laughing
the
at the
illusion.
fantasy.
She's laughing. Yeah.
Well, she's not just laughing. I think she's saying, I can do that too.
Well, she says, I can do that, but I can... she's already seeing it from an ironic distance.
Because I think
he's so wrapped up in the fantasy, he can't see it.
Right. That's why I think she's an intriguing character, because I think she is fighting off her own sexuality in the way that she does it. She calls him Daddy-O. Yeah. She's dressed in the way she is, very properly. She has those glasses.
While designing lingerie the entire time.
Yes, exactly. And it seems to me a little bit excited by the idea that there is an engineer somewhere who, after work, spends his time working on bras.
But I think her function is decidedly therapeutic, with the stepladder, one step at a time, and the Mozart. That she's not indulging his fantasies at all, or offering herself into them. I think she's saying, if you ever want something solid, if you ever want to shake this illness, I represent sanity and kind of 3 square meals a day. You know, 100% virtue with 3 square meals a day.
Right? My feeling about that is the same about all the characters, that everybody in this movie has 2 characters. There is the character of, let's take Madeleine Judy, who is this girl who's come, I think, from Kansas.
Salina, Kansas.
And she has been misled and lured by this evil man who has promised her all sorts of good things, money, richness, and so on, maybe even marriage, I don't know, and who then realizes that she herself is his victim because he's left and she has not much money, has thought it's just this one necklace and the dress hanging in the closet, and falls in love madly with the person who is trying to rescue her. That's the romantic part. Mm-hmm. The rescuer and the rescued, the prostitute and the man who goes to the prostitute fall in love, and they create this whole new wonderful life. But the other side of it is that she's a manipulative woman, out to get money, out to get riches, and she acts in a very convincing way this role. She's a good actress at it, and she manages to get Scotty to essentially contribute to the murder of Gavin's wife. And then when she finds Scotty comes back to her, she has a second opportunity. And so now she has another guy who's obviously relatively wealthy and who's going to support her. Except she goes too far. And when she goes too far, she doesn't realize that Scotty has such a problem with submission to other men, with jealousy of other men, and so she gets herself into trouble. So
what do you mean jealousy by the men? I didn't get that.
When in the scene, I think this is a key part of Scotty's character, if you want to psychoanalyze him, is as he's going up those steps, the first thing he says at one point is, I can do it, which is a strange thing to say, not because he's not feeling great, he's overcoming his phobia, but he has this woman who is in a state of panic, suffering, shivering, going up the steps, and he's complimenting himself for being able to go up those steps. Not a nice guy. He then starts saying to her things about, he did the same to you. he did the same things I have done to you before. He dressed you up. He doesn't say that. He says, you know, you dressed up and you did this and you did that. He's essentially describing on those last steps everything Gavin had arranged, had fixed, and dressed her up. So he feels so much jealousy at that point that he's ready to kill her. He doesn't, because Hitchcock doesn't want her to kill her, and he wants to create a moment of loving between them.
He kills her in the novel.
But he does? Yeah.
He kills her in the novel.
Because it makes more sense. It makes more sense. So I think all of these, and you can also do the same with Scotty, John, and whatever, Ferguson, and you can describe him as a character who is fragile, who feels guilty because the policeman fell, and who's trying to redeem himself. Or you can describe him as someone who has these fantasies about women. He's tremendously afraid of them, so he can have a kind of comfortable relationship with Madge, but the moment things become sexual, he starts losing it and has to bring in tremendous amount of control, which is the essence of perversion. If in a perversion the man tells the woman, I want you to wear a black leather skirt 3 inches above your knees, if it's 4 inches, he's not happy. If it's 6 inches, he's not happy. If it's a red skirt as opposed to a black skirt, he's not happy. There is that quality that he demonstrates in the movie. And I think the same is true of Gavin, right? He's a nice guy. He's a friend, but he's trying to kill his wife, screw his friend.
I don't think there are any levels to Gavin.
I don't think there's any redeeming quality.
Well, he comes across, in the beginning, he's a friend, and he is in trouble, and he wants another friend to help him out. Mm-hmm. Even to the point that when there is the court hearing, he's there saying, you know, they don't understand you, but I understand you.
It's all lies.
It's all phony.
Now, we know it's phony, but in terms of the two Gavins, there's that Gavin that you are seeing at that point, and then there is the other Gavin who has this whole plan to go to Europe with his wife's money. So there is constantly these two sides of the people, if you want to speculate about the characters.
But I agree with you about the two sides. I mean, that would be my answer to you, Brigitte, about the romantic side of it. The second half is entirely pathological. It's perverse. But I think it's a mistake to simply read the pathology and perversion of the second part of the film back onto the motivation of the character in the first part of the film, which is very different. He doesn't know anything about this.
You can do that in a movie. You can't do that in life, because you don't become perverse halfway through your movie in life.
Well, I mean,
You are that way from the outset.
but what about the dream that Scotty has, in which Madeline does not appear at all? Carlotta appears, and he assumes the position of Madeline more than once. So can we read backwards to maybe not perversion there, but to some instability from those dream images?
Well, he's got a complete identification. Yeah, he's merging. There's a complete identification, isn't there?
But it's not because of romantic love, perhaps.
Well,
I don't.
No, but that's
think.
Tristan and Isolde, isn't it? I mean, the whole like the Schopenhauerian idea. You know, you can only, although he rejected in the end the idea that with the leap stop, but the only way you can fulfill romantic love is in death, because essentially there's a separation between there's this inevitable chasm between one subjectivity and another. There's and the only way that chasm can be overcome, and of course it's confused, but the only way that can be overcome is through in the Liebestod. Yeah. So it is a romantic idea.
It's a Liebestod.
It's an ideal of romantic love that comes from romanticism.
Well,
not Hollywood, I agree.
No.
I may be very cynical, but I think that real intense romantic love is pervert.
Yeah, but that's a psychoanalytic, cynical perspective, isn't
Yes,
it?
I said.
That's precisely the point of view I'd want to argue against, because that is ultimately is reductive of the concept of love.
But that's what you're
It's
arguing.
based on experience.
A Liebestod is not a real. It's a love and death. That's what it's what it means. It's passion. It's right. what the Germans call it.
I'm not defending Liebestod.
But I'm saying it's. Yeah, but I mean,
I'm not saying that that's an accurate.
consistent idealization, which is to some degree part of excessive romantic love, is problematic.
Right.
Because
but
it's a lot nicer to see the person with their pluses and minuses.
Right.
And the minuses sometimes enrich the person even more and make them more lovable.
Yeah.
But that's not the ideal in romantic.
Love and romantic love are not the same.
Well,
in my view. Well, it's just a personal opinion.
well, but there's love between, because then you have to, if you talk about love in general, you're talking about sibling love, you're talking about love,
but I mean,
so,
love is accepting the other person for whom that person really is, and not some idealized notion. But yeah, okay. But
wasn't love an invention of the medieval courtiers?
Well, if so, then it's very, how can I put it, structured. That's romantic love. That's not real love, and it has, involves a whole series of things one does and postures one assumes, doesn't it?
It seems like sex, in a way, destroys that kind of idealized romantic love. Once there is, because most of the stories, no sex happens in them.
In the medieval, it's not about that. It's about a very formulae that one employs and modes of address, and
of course
they do once.
Yes.
He takes her
After, just before they go out to dinner.
Oh yeah.
When she, and that's the other thing.
I meant the first half of the film, not Judy as Madeline.
That's hard to.
No, what's interesting is that
in Monterey.
There's that wonderful scene in that. It's an extraordinary scene, isn't it, in Scotty's room when he's rescued her from the water, when. There's this mutual knowledge that he's seen her naked.
But then retroactively, we know that she has been not unconscious, but conscious the entire time.
Yes.
Because this man is seeing her naked.
So she knows that he's seen her naked.
Yeah.
Well,
but he doesn't know that she knows he's seen her naked.
Exactly.
Well, he's kind of blind all through that part of the movie. He doesn't see anything. He's a voyeur who doesn't see anything.
That's good.
But then when she comes out, that sequence, she's wearing his red robe.
Yes.
And there's a look on his face when she comes out. Where Stewart seems to be conveying two things at once. One, attraction to her because he thinks, I've seen her nude and she doesn't realize this, or maybe she has realized this because she's put on the robe. But also, part of the whole narcissism of his attraction to Madeline, she's wearing his robe. But it fits him beautifully, the way a woman's robe would fit, and not the way a man's robe. It's not oversized the way it would be logically.
Right. Yeah.
There is something I wanted to ask people like you guys who have such kind of particularly worked out, educated view of movies, is that there is a thing I noticed is that, for example, there is the scene with the inn where she goes and then she's behind the window and then she disappears, and when he goes, she's already no longer there. And Hitchcock never explains this.
No.
And there are other things in the movie that are incongruous like that, but seem to me increase one's curiosity and increase one's sense of mystery that is going. Is that why is that the motive force behind these, what otherwise would seem lapses of logical trend?
It's an interesting question, because he had this thing about what did he call them? The icebox crowd, the icebox, the
plausibles.
So when the husband and wife, and he always thought it was the wife, husband and wife come home from the movies and they go to the icebox and they talk about what happened in the film, and that couldn't have happened, and they start dissecting the film and the logic breaks down. And he was always very concerned with the logic of his films and actually making them convincing and not having the kind of
films are full of illogical
egregious. Well, they are, but not in the egregious manner of the woman just simply disappearing from the. When Madeline disappears from the house, it's an egregiously illogical moment.
Well, the other one is when she's in his apartment and he goes to take a phone call, and she's in the street already, all dressed up. She put her underwear, her stockings, her shoes, her dress.
Yes.
He went in the other room. If that changes the entire, whatever happens in the adjoining space is magical.
I mean, this came up in the Truffaut interview book, though, and I think Truffaut actually, because Hitchcock himself was pointing out some inconsistencies and illogic in the film, but Truffaut said the film has such a dreamlike logic, I don't think most people would even ask themselves those kinds of questions.
Well, but I think that's the point, isn't it? That you put generically motivated, and he's pushing the envelope here. But he's doing that in all sorts of ways in the film, really, isn't he? In terms of the whole plot is so egregious.
But that's one moment that stands out. I mean, usually he directs his way out of all the implausibilities, and he just tells the story in a way that you don't ask that question.
Yeah.
But the McKittrick Hotel, you do ask the question, and I think the only answer can be, it's magical.
Yeah, and what's interesting is he adds that to him and Lehman add it to the novel, because in the novel he doesn't actually go into the room. In the novel he waits outside the door, so that there's a way in which the novelists get away with the can maintain.
Well, it wouldn't be super logical to say, well, if the whole thing is staged, she just ran out she pulled out the blind, knew he was coming up the stairs, ran out the back, and as Hitchcock said, the Ellen Corby character was an obvious plant of Gavin's, and it was all part of the staged element of this situation. So one could, in fact, explain that illogical moment logically if one has access to the entire narrative.
And if the woman has been bribed, the woman at the desk, there are all
she's so
sorts
nice
of ways.
as well.
Yeah.
You can imagine that the woman at the desk is in fact Madeline, who went up, got changed, came down.
Putting olive oil on her plant leaves.
There was something.
There are other ways, too, in which Hitchcock disrupts the film and presents really almost abstract images to us. The first such image might be the horizontal bar, the close-up of the camera on the horizontal bar at the beginning of the film. Soon you see hands grab it. But beforehand, for a couple of seconds, the spectator wonders what it is that he or she is seeing.
Especially since it's out of focus.
It's out of focus, and it's very abstract. Right? It gestures outside the conventions of this space. And then it seems to me that the two, and people have noticed that the only two point of view shots that Madeline Judy is ever given involve the drive down to the mission. She's in the car, and suddenly you see from her point of view trees above and a bit of sky. And that is repeated. It's one of the moments that's repeated. That, too, strikes me as very abstract and gesturing beyond the conventions of space in this film. And I'm just really hoping somebody would have some light to shed on that for me.
I'm going to be boring with those point of view shots, actually, and say Hitchcock needs it to convey basic information that Judy recognizes she's being taken exactly to the same spot a second time, and the repetition of the point of view is a way of signaling that to the spectator.
You think it's only that?
Well, no, I don't like to say only that with anything in this film, but I would say one motivating principle here would simply be conveying clearly to the spectator Judy's agonized response to this moment. She recognizes what is happening to her.
Why wasn't the initial point of view shot of something else? Why wasn't it constructed differently? Why was it constructed in the way that it was constructed, I wonder? I mean, Bill Rothman has this theory about it in which he says it's about an empty space. It's, the empty space framed by the trees, and it's...
I think Hitchcock just needs some kind of image that conveys this idea of what Judy is experiencing vis-a-vis what she experienced as Madeline. And the more vague it is, the more abstract it is, the better. Because if you make it concrete, then suddenly it loses the mystery, and also it gives too much weight to her point of view shot.
And she has a subjectivity too.
Yeah, it takes her outside I suppose the space of the vehicle as well. It sort of, which is the proximity of Scotty. It actually sort of almost physically, the gaze, it's almost, the sense of the car being a very claustrophobic space, their personal space invading each other's personal space and somehow taking her outside that and pointing towards.
Brigitte, I think this is the time, when we start to ask if people would like to come up and have some. If you want to come up, please come to the mic, identify yourself, and make a question. You have to come up. Yeah.
I just,
She's first, yeah.
I just wanted to say, in the light of what we were just discussing, that something happened to me, or it's something I actually saw, which is that at that very scene where she's looking up at those trees in that empty space, I noticed when the shots were on the road, it looked as though they were driving on the left side of the road.
They were driving both times on the wrong side.
Oh, that's very interesting.
So,
Well, he was born in England.
also the
learn.
disorientation,
very-
whether
very
this
swift of
was
you.
from her point of view, or this was really what was going on in the movie. Was our complete. We were all manipulated, and we were on the left side of the road in case we didn't already know it. Yeah,
That's very interesting.
Very
I've
interesting.
never noticed that.
yeah. And I thought, and I kept saying to myself, no, this can't be. But since you were talking
Yeah,
about this in
yeah.
the context of everything else,
But occasionally they make mistakes, and what they will do will be if they shot the scene, they might flip the negative to get the car moving in the direction they want it to go in, and that would put it on the wrong side of the road.
but
the other side.
given that this is a Hitchcock movie, this was
Yeah, I mean-
this was a
Well,
deliberate.
the interior shots are okay.
Yeah, I can't believe it's
Yeah.
gratuitous.
Wrong shot.
Fortuitous. We have another question over on this side. You're next here on this side.
Yeah, in addition to the illusory or pathological aspect, he's a detective. So normally that would be significant that he's not a milkman or he's not whatever else. He's a detective, and as a detective, he's observant. And we see him observing and making connections. For example, when he follows her, he sees things in the paintings and he sees things on her hair and etc. So he's observant. And he's observant in that he sees her. He recognizes her later as well. When she is no longer Madeline, she's herself. So it seems to me that if we look at her, there's some questions about identity then that are raised, is especially with the romantic theme. Is there an identity that she has that he's recognized previously and recognizes later and is connecting with, which would, I think, reinforce the romantic aspect. So I find it, difficult to just discount those aspects of the observant and the symbolic in the sense that he's a detective, and therefore he does observe. He's not totally in illusion.
But I think that the detective. I think the aspects of Scotty as a detective is a really important part of the film because he's in a sense he's very. It's his very rationality, and that's partly how he's entrapped. It's like it's excruciating because he's very, his very meticulousness and methodicalness and accuracy is what actually tracks it's part of the whole. He's undermined by his own. Integrity.
But he's also a retired detective, that makes all the difference. I think because, I think Hitchcock is fascinated by amateur detectives and false detectives. Anything where they're not professional policemen or professional detectives. I think the process of professional detection bores him. His comment was, why don't they go to the police? Is a question that's often asked in relation to narratives, including his narrative. He said, my standard response is, they don't go to the police because it's dull. And I think this element of professional detection is not something that interests him in relation to Vertigo. He's got to be retired and deeply flawed as a detective as well, which caused him to see things as a detective, but in his own particular way here. But coming back to your question in terms of why he recognizes Judy on the street, it strikes me that it's almost, to a large extent, visual, and that is to say, she steps into a kind of profile image, and he recognizes the profile from Ernie's, and that's the trigger. So it's partly visual, partly intuitive, and then the stalking, the trailing, then follows that. So that scene almost immediately begins to reenact the initial obsession with Madeline.
Yes, but it is visual, and so as a detective, he's good at interpreting and visual evidence.
Right,
and
but it's a visual evidence tied back into his neurosis. Forgive me.
There's still a convention that he cannot recognize Kim Novak as Kim Novak. I mean,
well, what about her identity?
I think we should go on to another question here.
I just wanted to
But I think we need to go. We have so many people.
This is brief.
Okay.
But nobody still is speaking about her identity. So I think there's still a question that she's not an empty whatever or just simply a manipulative figure in the film. We see on the romantic aspect that connection when she's Madeline, when they connect, and later on we see it again. So I think there are questions raised about her identity. Is there an identity? Is she, because of what was raised before about the two-ness of each character? Mm-hmm. So she is manipulative. She did all this, put him through all this. But on the other hand, something got connected, and there's been no discussion. So that's all.
I think the film was ultimately weighed towards Judy as a kind of tragic figure rather than a manipulative one. Because we never see the manipulation at work. All we see is Judy after the fact, a victim of Gavin Elster. So I think the manipulative elements are so buried in the film that they don't have a great deal of weight.
I think that's the richness of it. I'm not sure this guy, I mean, I agree he sees, but I don't agree he draws conclusions. He's a good seer, but not a real, he looks, but he doesn't really see. He doesn't go below the surface. It's all about the surface.
Dorothy, do you want to
I'd kind of like to address a deeper question.
Who are you?
Dorothea Rockburn. I'm a painter. I'd like to address a kind of deeper question that seems to underlie all of Hitchcock's films that I know, and that is alienation. Now, you're talking about the interaction of the characters in the movie, but it's really a movie about alienation.
Yep.
It's true.
Well, any thoughts on that subject?
Yeah, that's Rear Window as well. All these people living in the New York block who don't know each other. This is Rear Window on wheels, as far as I'm concerned.
That's good.
Alienation is one side. But alienation is also one side. I mean, in Rear Window, Rear Window is also about making connections, and it's about
convicting your neighbor of murder.
Well, yeah, but with justification.
That's a good connection, yeah.
But Vertigo is just much more. Oh, she's gone. Oh, there you are. It's just more potent and more powerful in terms of this theme of alienation, because unlike Rear Window, there's no reformation or formation of the couple, and there's no restoration of the order. Mm-hmm. Everything is just split. Gavin Elster gets away with murder, literally. Yeah. Judy, who's become extremely sympathetic in the last 40 minutes of the film, is killed off. Midge disappears. Yeah. And Scotty's left alone, presumably cured, but I don't know if any single spectator who's seen this film is happy or cares that Scotty's cured by the end of the film.
He might have been briefly cured,
I'm not sure
but then at the end he's
or what
not
he
cured
declares
anymore.
It is, but whatever.
Yeah, we don't see him go down the stairs. Can he make it down the stairs?
I think that the character of the nun defining the whole movie is the most alienating device I've ever seen.
Well, she has that fantastic line, "I heard voices," which is a line that also has at least two meanings. One is, I heard voices, literally, I heard voices, but also I heard voices meaning a kind of religious lunacy in a way. God is talking to me, the saints are talking to me, the Song of Bernadette or whatever. So it's also tied very beautifully into I would say, both the rational nature of the film and its attraction to logic and to the irrational.
Yeah. Good. And of course, it's a figure of a nun, and so it's a nun as the angel of death. So it's a deeply ironic.
And Hitchcock's Catholicism coming into play here
deeply ironic and subversive. It's really his most. I mean, I think alongside Psycho, but perhaps even more so, it's his most darkest. Vertigo is his darkest, most nihilistic film.
You found Psycho nihilistic?
Sorry?
No. We have another question.
Hi, I'm Mary Hill. And what surprised me in this film is that nowhere, neither Scotty nor Madeline acknowledged any kind of guilt or that they were engaging in an adulterous thing, that they were... I mean, it was just a And this was when it meant more in those days. It was like like it didn't matter, wasn't it?
Well, it's really the declining days of the production code where you can get away. I mean, even more than that, Gavin getting away with murder is indicative of the production code's loosening standards. Yeah. So 58, we're really seeing this all beginning to be phased out.
Well, but those feelings still should be present in people.
Sir, did you have a question?
Yeah, more like a few observations and some comments on comments. So, firstly, I was thinking of there's a way of trying to tie together from a psychoanalytic perspective. Stuart Dambrot, physiological psychologist. Okay, trying to tie together a few things, specifically his both perverse and observational nature. So I was thinking about a very early childhood and the things that can result when there's an inadequate or some kind of attachment disorder that stems from a relationship with the nurturing parent. And then I connected that to a great line from a John le Carré novel, which is The Dishonorable Schoolboy, where he said, being from a broken home, he was naturally an observer. So I can see that those two behavioral characteristics could be. And then I started thinking, well, look, that means that there is this theme of familial genesis where she said, well, she remarried and I didn't like him. So there was clearly some dysfunction in her household as well. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Maybe I can make this
please.
Higher.
Because this is a pain. See, it's not so easy. Right? I tried to take it out of here.
Just keep talking. Pretend I'm not here.
That's so difficult, but it's like a movie, so I guess I can try. Look, I have it. Forget it. I have it here. That's good. This is better. Thanks. Thank you. Okay, so there's that. Then the one thing about the scene in the trees when they're down the road, that's also an impossible shot because she would have to be craning forward and looking up and outward at a very difficult angle out of the windshield to see that. So I see it more along the empty space also. But also a comment on her wanting and needing to escape from this duplicity that she's ensconced herself in. Yeah. Something like that. Then the comment that she, in fact, wasn't manipulative in the second half. No, she had a choice. She could have been truthful with him. And she continued to manipulate to get what she wanted. So I take exception with that response to that comment. And there was more, but I've forgotten it.
Okay, thank you very much.
What's interesting about the character of Scotty, of course, in the film is like he's a complete blank. I think Robin Wood says this. I mean, the guy's a complete blank slate. You know, you have this 50-year-old man, 50-something man, and you know absolutely nothing about the character. And in a way, even though there is, there's a way in which Hitchcock is, and in that sense, is and is not interested in psychology. I mean, it's a very abstract concept of character here, in which you can sort of invent anything you like.
Ballure insists that all of Hollywood narratives are Oedipal, and certainly all of Hitchcock's narratives are Oedipal, and the obvious Oedipal reading of this is that Elster is the father and Madeline's the mother. So that this is working through that scenario twice, actually.
If anyone's the mother,
that's speculation that even worse and more speculative than what I said. But I just want to answer to the question about Freud's idea about this kind of perversion, which is primarily fetishism, is that the boy does not want to recognize that his mother doesn't have a penis. And so he's always looking and not saying, because he always has to fantasize that there is a phallic, it's the image of the phallic woman. That's the... So... And he has that, he sees, but he never knows that there's really something there more than what he sees.
Can I just respond to one thing about Judy and manipulation, which is that there is an attempt on her part, but it's immediately taken away from her by Scotty, whose obsession completely overrides her own. There's a sense in which she's completely powerless once his fantasy takes over there towards the transformation. She could have, but I think she's a kind of tragic figure. I mean, there's a way in which these things are.
Well, she has some needs that are getting fulfilled. Otherwise, she would say, "Listen, go out, go away. You're just trouble here."
I don't think she's had any needs being fulfilled. I think the needs, she's delaying her needs for some later kind of fulfillment with Scotty's final recognition of it.
I think she's lacks control, and maybe when she puts the jewel on, she's actually doing that because she wants
some need to be
somehow communicate. No, she wants him to know the truth.
Right.
She wants to reduce that cognitive.
Yeah, and so she it's not actually an act of, it's an unconscious action. It's not an act of voluntary agency.
I don't think so. But I never met her. I didn't get the chance to ask her why she did it.
Yeah, right.
But an unconscious act of putting a necklace like that on you and keeping it on for 10 minutes without saying anything about it doesn't happen.
You're right.
She could put it on and then say, "Oh my God, what did I do?" But she put it on, and
Well, she put it on in a movie as well.
I didn't mean. Well, that's why I said unconscious, because I don't think you can put it down to a character motivation. But there's an unconscious there's some kind of logic being. That there's the sense that this action is somehow has another.
well, you could say there is a logic, which is that she's saying, "Let's see how far we can push this."
Yeah, but that would be. I don't think that's a plausible.
But she also wants to be Carlotta. Right? She wants to be the real Carlotta.
Be Madeline, yeah.
That I don't know. Maybe.
I don't. She doesn't want to be Madeline. She wants Scotty to love. She says repeatedly, "Love me,"
as myself.
Which is a common complaint among people, that they really want you to like them for what they are.
She wants Scotty to love her, and she goes along. She eventually goes along, coerced, because he wants it so much. She wants him to love her, so she'll go along with it.
And ironically, for a brief moment, he seems to, because she's still Judy in personality in that hotel room, dressed as Madeline. The behavior, let's go out for a big steak, and all this, it's very Judy. It's not Madeline. She's not this dreamy-eyed woman attracted to death. She is Judy, but dressed as Madeline.
Well, that's my point.
Should we go on? Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Ben Roth. I'm a psychoanalyst, and I've written on film. But I have to really tell you, this was a stimulating and brilliant discussion, and I really took a lot of what you said in. But I'd like to raise the two issues, aside from saying that. First is the issue about impostoring, which covers the doubling and the perversion, and there's a great deal of impostoring in the field, people posing as somebody that they're not. The other is Leiades, I think it is, if I'm right, statement that the detective is always the boy seeking the evidence of the primal scene and the parental intercourse. And every time that there's a detective story that's played out, that there's the little boy seeking and not wanting to find, but also having to find, which was one of the themes of Rear Window. The other thing I noticed this time that I never noticed before was how many framing shots there were. There are a tremendous amount of arches and windows, and you raised the question about some of the frame shots. Somebody said John Huston always put John Wayne in the doorway, shooting from the dark to the outside to create a contrast and say how large the outside was. Here, the character's always looking in a frame. The pictures are in a frame. There's always an archway. She even falls through an archway. And if you went back and counted the frames and the arches in this movie, there's an enormous amount. I mean, I stopped counting at 10, 15 for all the frame shots within arches. And if anybody can comment about that, I'd love to learn about it.
Thank you.
And mirror shots, too, with the frames.
And then the multiplication of paintings within the decor as well. So frames everywhere.
Marcia, do you want to have one last question? Introduce yourself to us.
It's a comment. I've been thinking about the form of the spiral. You can think of the beginning point of that spiral several ways, but I'm thinking of it now. The whole thing is then about representation. Well, what's being represented? The dead, murdered Carlotta, who was the only Carlotta we do not see, right? So you could link that up with absence if you wanted to. Then there are as many Carlottas as you can possibly count. There are the three in a way. Then there are the fantasies. There's a fantasy in his eyes. There's his dream.
then there are the fantasies that have to do with his own version of what really happened, namely the woman falling out the window. So that's I was puzzled about why there should be a spiral. To me, that's it, or one of it.
Any comments on that?
I mean, you have the ideas about spiral. My feeling about the spiral is also the opposite, which is you spiral down.
Yeah.
You spiral up, you spiral down.
The opening image is one of penetration through a spiral. It's horizontal, but then when the film develops, its trajectory, narrative trajectory, that is not a pre-credit sequence, but actually going somewhere. It seems to me that the spirals are going downward. And that's kind of the entrapment of the hero.
There's the graphic treatment of the spiral face on. It creates the optical illusion that it's moving toward the center, but really it's not going anywhere. So that's an interesting commentary on the fact that he's repeating this behavior, which is starts with obsession and perversion and the whole lot.
I want to say one thing again about the necklace, because it's a puzzling thing in the movie. So you can say it was a kind of absent act, like a parapraxis that she unconsciously. Well, I think she didn't think he would have that reaction. And she was surprised that he had that kind of reaction.
I actually agree with you.
Good.
I have a comment. My name is Michael Sachs. On that very question about why, and the question raised about why she just didn't tell him that she was Madeline all along. Why? Because it seemed she obviously felt that she would lose his love because she would have revealed herself as an accessory to the fact of murder and the fact that she had been manipulating him all along. So, again, following up on sort of a psychoanalytic pathway, was it her feelings about guilt about that led her to finally open up about who she was by putting on the jewel?
Well, certain killer returning to the scene of the crime idea, but displaced onto objects she holds on to, as he puts it, souvenirs of the killing. So she holds on to the necklace, she keeps the gray suit, almost as though she wants to hold on to these objects that incriminate her in this crime.
And Do we have time for one more question?
Okay.
Yeah, one last question.
Well, I'm just wondering if any...
Who are you?
Jenny Beth Miller, I'm a licensed massage therapist. I'm just wondering if anybody... It was only a split second that we saw the nun's face, and I'm wondering if that was the same person as the innkeeper, and that Madeline realized that split second that she was foiled and jumped up.
I think the idea is because what we see is just this black... All Judy sees is this black specter coming up.
Well, we see the white, but not the. We see the white actually around her face, but not.
But there's no sense
the
of a
face.
nun going upstairs, but just something rising up like this.
So that invisible thing, that's very inspiring.
Anyway, thank you very much, everybody. Wonderful panel.